what role do universities play in the medical industry? In other words, a lot of us think of universities as just places where we go to college and go to grad school. A lot of people aren't even aware of their role. So what is the role of universities in the medical industry?
So the role changed radically starting in 1980. We passed a bill called the Bayh-Dole Act. It was a time when Japan was starting to kind of pick America's pocket with cheaper cars and the early computer technology. So we passed the Bayh-Dole Act because much of the money that was paying for federal research was developing products that were never commercialized. And the feds felt they were wasting their money. So in order to make sure that the research that they funded actually got into the market to be able to benefit society, they passed the Bayh-Dole Act, which said that when universities and other nonprofit research institutions get federal money to do studies, they can patent the results of the findings of their research, federally funded research, and they can keep the money. This is critical. The book that Harvard President Derek Bok wrote is called Universities in the Marketplace. So universities, which when we all went to college were places seen as the overseers of the integrity of the knowledge that society operates on, suddenly became profit-making centers. And their questions, and this is a big part of how American medicine has gotten off track. The question is, how can we make products? It's called innovation, but innovation doesn't mean that you're making a product that's going to make society a better place. It means that you're going to make a product that makes money. And so universities, rather than being overseers of the integrity of knowledge, became producers of commercial knowledge. And this is a major, major cornerstone foundation of how we've gotten off in this wrong direction.
Indeed, we now have the medical industrial complex, to paraphrase Dwight Eisenhower. The fact is that, we have partnered with, pharma in this glad-handing version of profit making. So I completely agree, and you can see it in so many different ways.
I had always I'm not involved in the medical industry, and then at some point I had heard that there's something called the Cochrane Review, which was the solution that they were going to be these high integrity organization that was going to carefully review studies so that the lay public could get accurate information. What is the status of the Cochrane reviews? Are they a solution to make sure we get accurate information?
Well, it's like I said before, the Cochrane group does meta-analyses, taking data that's already in the literature and conglomerating it. The problem is the results are only as good as the data that goes into it. So if the data is tainted, then the results are tainted, garbage in, garbage out. In fact, Peter Goethe, who was one of the heads, was the European head of the Cochrane Review, ultimately quit it, in part because it was not they were not maintaining their scientific integrity, and they were basically publishing garbage themselves.
He was actually he was ousted in a kind of a palace coup, and he, as far as I can tell, he was trying to maintain their independence, and these people now have pharmaceutical ties. So, I mean, I think it's probably still one of the better sources of information, but it's like everything else, the money creeps in.
It is a good source of information, and they also grade the evidence, and it's not a matter of uncritically including all trials. They will grade the evidence and look at what they call the risk of bias. In other words, for each study that they include in one of their summaries, they'll say, well, these ones are at high risk of bias. So you need to be careful these ones, or this one is at low risk of bias, and so it may be more reliable. And that's a fairly good way of not just sort of uncritically piling all the studies together, which a lot of, as Dr. Litton says, a lot of reviews do that. And it's a shame that they do.
We got a really good education about the importance of the Cochrane reviews from the reviewers of the drug Tamiflu, the drug to treat influenza. They wrote a review based on the evidence that was available and said that Tamiflu is an effective drug and it decreases hospitalizations and may decrease death. And they got a letter from a Japanese doctor about 3 years after they published the initial review and said that the articles that you have relied on include data that from drug company studies that were never published. So not only did peer reviewers not get the evidence, but nobody got the evidence. And the Cochrane reviewers doggedly and in thousands of hours of their volunteer time chased down the data from Roche, the manufacturer, I think it's Roche, of Tamiflu. And it went back and forth for maybe 4 years. And they finally got the data from the manufacturer. And the data showed that there was no evidence that Tamiflu decreased hospitalizations or deaths. And in fact, the total benefit of Tamiflu, this is a drug that all the major wealthy countries had been stockpiling to fight flu. The total benefit of Tamiflu was to decrease the symptomatic period from 7 days to 6 1/3 days. And they rewrote that. They had total integrity. They rewrote the Cochrane review, and that is the review that stands, even though, unfortunately, many doctors believe, and I even hear the people at the CDC sometimes say we're looking for a drug like Tamiflu, and I just have to laugh because I hope they don't mean it.
Tamiflu went viral as Scamaflu. That was what everybody called it after that episode.
Yeah. The guys who did that, yeah.
You just mentioned, we spoke about the FDA. What about the CDC? What is their role? What's their relation in the medical industry? What kind of accuracy do they have? Tell us about how they fit into the medical industry.
I have 2 words: Coca-Cola. And I'm serious. Coca-Cola has bought off the CDC, and I can prove it. If you want me, I'll find the slides that show Brenda Fitzgerald, who was the head of the CDC back in 2015 to 2017. He was on the Coca-Cola board and actually published several blogs about childhood obesity, saying that it's a problem of exercise, taking money from Coca-Cola all the way. In fact, there are several industry there's several articles about the relationship between the CDC and the food industry in terms of non-communicable disease. I wouldn't trust anything that came out of that part of the CDC. On the infectious side, I'm sure I don't have as much information. I'll defer to my colleagues here on the panel. But on the non-communicable disease side, I wouldn't trust anything they said.
Okay. What is the medical review board and how does it influence what doctors teach or doctors say?
Do you mean the state boards of medicine?
I don't know. I have it written from one of the books. There was the medical review board and how doctors were afraid of the medical review board because they didn't do what they were told as part of the medical industry protocols, that they could get their license taken away by the medical review board. So that put pressure on them to follow along with whatever the industry was saying they needed to do.
Stephen, the doctors are regulated by each state and we're licensed in each state, and there's some reciprocity, but the thing that governs doctors' behavior and so on are state laws. and I think they were talking, as Dr. Abramson said, about the medical boards in the States. And the medical boards, when they get a complaint, they're required to investigate it. And they they have like a trial system with their own judges and their own investigators and so on. And it's something that can be a very unpleasant misadventure for any physician to get involved with. So that's what I think they were referring to.
I guess the question really is, do doctors have freedom to say, prescribe and treat patients as they like, or are there certain protocols they're expected to follow or not follow?
Well, the medical boards are not, I'm not going to answer this one. I'm not sure I'm as qualified as these other guys.
I mean, doctors are fairly free to prescribe what they think is best. One of the problems with policing medical practice is the medical negligence side of it. And the problem there, and I'd be interested to hear how the law works in the US, but I can tell you in Australia, which is probably representative of a lot of other countries, is that the standard that you are held to is the standard of your peers. And I do a lot of medical negligence expert witness stuff. And I have a problem where, for example, a surgeon can do a procedure that was unnecessary and led to harm. But when it gets to court, they say, is this a recognized treatment that peer surgeons perform and do? Is this a recognized treatment for this procedure? And I have to say yes. I have to say it's completely unnecessary. It's wrong, and it shouldn't be done. But yes, everybody's doing it, and so legally, that doctor is in the clear. So you're basically covered if you're doing what everyone else is doing. And it's only when you stand out, like a friend of mine who did not operate on somebody, because I actually led a study that showed that this procedure on wrist fractures was no better than not operating. He didn't operate, and he got sued for not operating because he found the patient found some other surgeons that said he should have operated on him. And then it becomes he said, she said, and the court has to decide. But if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're pretty safe in medicine, unfortunately, because what everyone else is doing isn't always right.
I was going to say you're legally safe, but this is an important issue with our guidelines, which are financially conflicted and don't have access to the data, because those guidelines can be entered into these cases as evidence to show that the doctor should or should not have prescribed it based on what the guidelines say, but nobody's taken the guidelines to court.